So always a bridesmaid, never a bride.
There's a lot of things I want to talk to you about, Joe. I think it'd be really nice to go through a bit of how you got to where you are now. How did you start in software? How did you transition to where you are now in your career?
Thanks. First, let me say it's great to be here. It's quite a pleasure and an honor. Where did I get started in software? I mean, I could give you the safe answers I give in my job interviews, but the truth is it started in primary school when I started breaking into the library in order to get access to the one computer that the school had. That's how strongly I felt about it, and I was very disappointed at the games collection they had available for us, which was small to none. So I started writing my own. Nothing exciting in today's terms. It's certainly not enough to make a career out of. But from that point on, I was pretty clear in my own head. Whatever was going to happen in my life, it was going to be computer related. And there was just never any question or consideration of anything else.
Well, I can relate to that.
Where I got my start was databases. Right? I did database work straight out of university, very low level, almost help desk level stuff. Ended up at a small direct marketing startup, which obviously uses a lot of data and is also regulated with what it can do with customer data. And that stood me in good stead later on in life. But my real break is when I joined one of the database vendors, Sybase. They don't exist anymore. They were acquired by SAP. But I joined their Melbourne office in Australia as consultant number 2. And this was an opportunity to be a big fish in a very small pond. I had a lot of opportunities that if I'd been in one of the larger practices where I was one of 100 consultants, right, I would have just been sent out to a year-long project and would have had one project a year and hardly any opportunities. But when you're a founder, effectively, like that, I would be sent different places every week, sometimes more than one a week. And that, I think, is what really got me started. It means I've been customer facing for almost everything I do. And that's something we're to come back to with this conversation about becoming a non-executive director. And it also meant I was very, very close to the business. So one of the interesting things about my career is I have never actually had the job title software engineer or developer. I have never done that work, although I write code. I've also never had the title solutions architect, although I certainly design and build solutions. I've never been called technical program manager, but I make product decisions for what we're going to ship and why. I've never been a manager of any kind, although I have had up to 10 people reporting to me at a time. Not very many at a time, most of the time. Certainly I've led cross-functional and cross-team projects. And I've never been a senior manager or director. I've kind of bypassed that layer completely in getting onto boards. And that's also something we'll come back about. So always a bridesmaid, never a bride. I've never been a software engineer, but I have done almost every part of every individual contributor job. In fact, just last week, an engineering director at Google told me that it sounded like what I did was everything that she did, just minus the headcount and, well, minus the stock options.
Wow. To try and start at the beginning then, number 2 in at Sybase. So was Sybase very much a startup at that point?
No, Sybase had been around for a good 15 years, I think, at that point. They were the very scrappy number 3 in the market. They probably wouldn't like me to say that, but Oracle was the big one and Microsoft SQL Server was the number 2, which is sort of funny because the Microsoft SQL Server actually used to be the Sybase product. Sybase sold them the code line and they parted way and the code lines diverged, but MS SQL Server was originally Sybase. So Sybase was a scrappy number 3, as I like to call them, and that meant, again, heaps of opportunities, right? When you're number 1, you can get a bit arrogant and a bit complacent. Number 2, you still have a pretty good sense of security. When you're a number 3 and trying to get that market share, you've got something to prove to everyone. And that was the attitude that really was throughout the company. We need to try a little harder. We need to do a little more. And I was part of their professional services division where they promoted me.
I'm trying to remember which car hire firm had that literally, you've almost said it there, that marketing slogan. It's like, we're number
Try a
3,
bit
we try
harder.
harder.
I don't remember, but it's in my head as well. Someone did, but it wasn't just a slogan or a gimmick. We really did have to prove ourselves out in the market. And I was told from almost week one of working there, and probably every month of my career since, "Oh, Sybase, that's a dying market. That's going to die soon." And I've heard that for over 20 years now. So yeah, unquestionably, it is a shrinking market. Since SAP acquired them, SAP are very, very good at selling what they sell, business applications. They've always seemed a bit uncertain. This is my personal opinion here before the lawyers get involved. My personal opinion is that SAP have always been a bit unsure of how to sell infrastructure, which is, of course, what a database is. So their people don't sell it as much, and as a consequence, I think the market is shrinking. But it was a fantastic opportunity. As I said, big fish in a small pond. And it meant, given as I was in what we call the professional services division, which most places would probably be called post sales, I did the implementation, but I was often brought in to help close a sale on the sort of the technical pre sales, or today we might call that a field sales engineer sort of role. So that was great. That meant I was involved in the sales, especially once I sort of proved my chops there and showed that actually I was kind of good at that, which meant that, I had some opportunity to influence the decision. By the time you get to implementation or engineering, the why are we doing something and even the what are we going to do have usually been determined by someone else. But by being there in the sales side and almost on the product side, but from a services view rather than a product view, if that makes any sense, it meant I had some ability to influence the direction of the design and solution, but only some. I mean, at least 50% of the work was putting out fires and cleaning up messes. But that's where you learn, right? Every week a learning opportunity. So I learned so much there, and constantly customer facing. What a gift.
So I'm going to put the customer facing again in a minute and the solution architect. I was just trying to quantify. So Sybase weren't a startup, but they had a lot of opportunities. So then was it because it was a small new office in Australia that you kind of got that position as or that opportunity?
Yeah, their headquarters were in Sydney, and Sydney is physically quite close, but culturally quite far from Melbourne. There's a huge distinction, Melbourne versus Sydney. So Sydney office was very large. The Melbourne office, when I joined, I think was maybe 6 or 7 people. It did expand while I was there. So in some senses, it sort of had a startup vibe to it. The offices were small. You worked with a small crew of people whom you saw, every hour of every day that you were in the office, certainly. But the organisation as a whole was not small. If I'm remembering correctly, after a few years, there was something like over 5,000 employees. So, it's by no means big tech, but that's not a startup either once
Yeah,
you're into
yeah.
the
But you
thousand
kind of got
employees.
that startup within a enterprise feel. So you
Yes,
had the opportunities from being in a small group, but the support and the infrastructure of a larger company.
yes,
Cool.
exactly. Australia is very, very far from everywhere, culturally and geographically. So there were, Sybase was huge in the US, pretty big in Europe, fairly large in most of Asia, but Australia was, as a percentage of the overall corporate money, quite small, I think, and we felt very far from headquarters.
So let's pull a bit more at the customer facing and solution architecture. Early in my career, and I'm talking mid to late 90s, early 2000s, there was very much the view that we shouldn't let software engineers talk to customers. They're not capable of it. I never really liked that because I always like to understand things. So, right from day one as a software engineer, I wanted to know why. I was quite lucky. I worked for a smallish company at the time. It was a few hundred people. And because I'd done my work experience with them when I was in the sixth form, so when I was about 17, when they actually back about 80 people, I knew some of the directors. And that meant that when I joined, I had the opportunity, because I spoke up and I knew some of these people, and I was maybe too naive to be intimidated by the fact that somebody was an executive. I asked them questions, and I found, again, a lot of people have ready to talk to them, but they drank coffee. I drank coffee. I've been in the kitchen and say, hey, so how's it going this week? What are we doing? What are the challenges? And I very quickly ended up going out to support sales meetings, which was kind of weird as somebody that's a few weeks out of university. But I thought it was great exposure. I learned so much from doing that, and it was such a great opportunity. And I found that very, very satisfying throughout my career to be talking to the customer, understanding the why, as you say, helping to shape the solution, helping to steer things in the right way. And also sometimes, like much later in my career, talking to like Facebook and Apple, being able to say, from a very engineering perspective, when we're selling them engineering products, what's the actual problem? Oh, actually, we can help you with a much bigger solution. So turning what was maybe for them a small buy of 500,000 into a sale for 1.5 million for our company, which was as a UK-based startup, was a big deal, creating that upsell. So what are the advantages you see of being that customer facing and doing the solution architecture? What has it really given you that sets you apart?
Well, I've sometimes described consulting as the delicate art of balancing what the customer asks for with what the customer needs. You have to give them a certain amount of both. It can't be just one or the other. And I think, exactly as you say, most companies shelter their engineering function. They don't allow them to talk to customers. They keep them very far from the customers, and certainly they'd never leave them alone in a room with the customer, because who knows what would happen, right? And I sort of understand that. Historically, the engineering skill set has not placed a priority on the people skills and the so-called soft skills. I hate saying soft skills, by the way. I think they are the hardest skills to learn. We should call them the hard skills, not the soft skills. But certainly that has not, until relatively recently, in my experience, been emphasized in the hiring decisions for engineering. So, okay, there's maybe an argument for stick to your knitting. Like, if you're hiring people to write code, you're not hiring them to sell, and we shouldn't expect them to be able to. I understand that, but I agree with you. As someone in that position, even though I've never been an engineer, I've absolutely been in a very, very deep infrastructure role, very far from the users. And it is frustrating, right? You're constantly wondering, why are we doing this? I mean, we want purpose in our lives and in our work. We want to know that we are actually solving someone's problem or doing something that matters to someone a bit more
Yeah,
than just increasing some shareholder value somewhere. Right? Certainly, I'm very motivated by that. I want to feel that I'm making a real difference to real people in the real world for real reasons, right? That I'm actually making someone's life a little easier, their workday a little smoother, getting rid of some frustrations. And working as a field consultant meant that I was always very deeply embedded in those customer frustrations. These days, we probably call them customer stories, I guess. But you know, a purely engineering focus, the companies deliberately keep us very far from that. And I think that's a terrible mistake. I think engineers do better work when they have a sense of purpose, when they know why. They might not get an opportunity to influence any of those things, but it's certainly a lot better if you know the why. I mean, that's the famous talk in the famous book, right? Start with why. And when you're at engineering, you're about as far from the why as it's possible to get and still be in the same organization. About the only business functions even further from the why might be like accounts payable or something.
it's a shame, isn't it? Because when you know the why, you can generally suggest a better solution. You can
Right.
think through the issues, and it opens up the problem space to your better understanding. It opens up your engagement to it, and with that bigger picture, you can generally suggest a better solution or maybe a different solution to what's being thought of. As you said, it's that balance between what the customer asks for and what they actually want. Otherwise, and I saw this fairly early in my career when we were taking requirements documents and doing very waterfall development, you built exactly what the customer asked for, and they hated it. They were livid. They didn't want to pay for it because it wasn't what they wanted. You've then got that very difficult situation where they're upset. You want to get paid for the work, or the company wants to get paid for the work you've done, sometimes to the tune of millions of pounds.
Hmm.
The customer doesn't pay for it because they don't want to spend millions of pounds on something that's of no use to them. So when we had that waterfall and that disparity, it was tragic, and it caused a lot of upset. And I saw several companies suing each other over it. Where if we have that more engagement, and that's why I rushed to adopt XP when I first heard of that as an agile methodology, because hey, let's talk to the customer. It's a great idea. And I experienced that early in my career, fortunately, where we were on a multi-year project and we did talk to customers. We had them come and work in the offices with us, and we worked in their offices. And I saw how well that worked because we actually got to understand their domain. For me, that also made the job so much more interesting because I worked with a charity, so I got to understand the charity and how they worked. I worked with a signaling system for a country in Asia. I got to understand railway signaling. I worked on digital CCTV. I got to learn about this was going to be for border security, so I got to learn about border security and digital CCTV. So I worked on digital TV and learned all about different embedded software, mobile tel, and the list went on. And I found it fascinating to learn all these domains. And the other thing is that you learn a lot of useful transferable skills from that. So some of the solutions that I built in, say, for the digital CCTV came from finance, came from actually stuff I'd learned from working in a financial area. Wouldn't have that broad context and that ability to sort of cross-pollinate ideas without that diversity and without having been interested in it more.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I wanted to pull on another thread there before I don't make it past any of my questions and forget the context of what you first said. You talked about having managed people whenever in a manager and all these different things. What was that experience like? And I want to then follow on to that of talk about how you progressed to becoming a non-executive director, having never been a manager formerly. A lot of people would expect a manager to be part of that career path.
Right, that's the stereotype, isn't it? You become a
Indeed.
senior manager, you become an executive, you become C-suite, and then you get on a board. That's the traditional journey that everyone sort of just knows that that's how it works. But
Yes.
it doesn't have to, and we'll come back to that. There's really a lot to say there that I think's very, very interesting. But gosh, where shall I even start there? So you asked me about my management type roles. I mean, in my Sybase days as a consultant, just as is in most companies, they had levels or grades, and the distinction between a senior consultant and a principal consultant was a very important one. And it's much like how big tech talks about the difference between senior, staff, and principal. So senior, you could live out your life as a senior just doing good work and being expert in one or more things. And the expectations the company had at the time of a senior consultant was that a senior could solve any problem in their specialty. So if they were known as a project management senior consultant, they could save any troubled project, they could get something back on track. If they were a technical senior, as most of us were, then you were expected to have one or more products that you were just an authority in, and any problem in that area you were expected to solve. But for a principal, the expectation was they could point a principal consultant to any problem and management could just relax because they would know it didn't matter what the problem was now going to go away. And what a fantastic opportunity this was for me to be with them long enough to get to that point. And if we have time, we'll see if this makes it into the final edit, but I've got a story I'll try to tell quickly. I was brought in fairly late in the piece to deal with one of their clients, which was a stockbroker in Sydney. And they flew me up Melbourne to Sydney and they just said, go into this meeting. It's a 1 hour meeting. We've been having problems with them for a long time, but we're not going to tell you anything about it because we don't want to prejudice you or anger you to anything. And I said, okay, that's fine. And I went in and it was a meeting with some fairly senior people up to and including vice president level. And I said, really sorry to make you explain all of this from the start, but I've deliberately not been told anything. This is a good thing here, though. It means I don't have a dog in this fight and I have none of the past to protect. So tell me what the problem is. And it turned out that a sale had been made to them and promises made during the sale, which anyone who understood the product involved would know was not a reasonable thing to have promised, right? It's a story as old as time. Anyone who sells software runs into this. This is not a new thing. But they were being really difficult about it. And I finally just said to them, look, I don't know what was said to you in the sale. I wasn't part of that. I can't comment on that. But I will tell you, as someone who is expert in this technology, I don't understand how anyone who knows the technology could have said that to you. And if it was said to you, then I'm really sorry that your time has been wasted with that. You obviously know it's not true. It's not hard to see that it's not true. You can open up the manuals and read for yourself that it's not true. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. So I'm really sorry that that's happened. Can we move forward? And all of a sudden, they uncrossed their arms, they leaned forward, they started smiling, and they said, "That's all we wanted." I'm like, "What?" Said, "We have been waiting 12 months for someone to say this to us, just to acknowledge that it wasn't realistic and to apologize for it." I'm like, "Huh, well, okay, that was 12 months that we all could have gotten back a little sooner, but now you've gotten that. I understand tech support are asking you for things that you're refusing to give them. Can we agree that you'll give them the things they've asked for?" Yes, I suppose. And the things that you were promised, I mean, we said you could implement this without making any changes to your application. Obviously, that's not quite true, but the changes that you'd have to make are, A, B, C, and D. And isn't it true that each of those are actually in your interests anyway? They'll speed things up, they'll use less space, they'll be better for this reason and that reason. They're all things you want anyway. And they said yes. I said, so what's the problem? I mean, we're asking you to do things that you've already agreed are valuable and that you want to do and would be in your book of work anyway. Can we just get on with it? And they're like, yeah, I suppose so.
So
And this had been going on for a year, right?
there are
Now,
two things that jump out at me there, Joe. One, I love situations like that. I find they're so much more satisfying to, here's a problem, go and fix it, rather than somebody goes, here's a solution, go and build it. So much more interesting. And I think a lot of people miss out by not having that experience, and you learn so much from it. It's also so much more satisfying. And the second is back to those soft skills. Again, something I hammer home to a lot of people, I find most people don't want to hear or don't understand is that beyond that senior level, it's predominantly soft skills that make a difference. All the things that we're solving are people issues. How do we work together? How do we have that empathy? How do we just say sorry to the customer when we messed up? Or sorry to somebody else in the team when we messed up? How do we deal with things if we're a bit upset, but we actually need to find a constructive way forward and not make it about winning the argument, but make it about winning the battle and finding the way forward, the solution that works for everyone? How do you think people, and particularly software engineers, can go about learning those soft skills and getting to that level so they can operate as a principal?
be in the room where other people are doing these things, I think is where I began, and so many people I know began. I think you even said you were being dragged along to sales meetings pretty early on in your career as well. No one was expecting you to make the sale, but you got to see it happening in real time. You got to see, oh, the room's looking like this and someone did this. And it's almost like training machine learning, right? You give people a training set, read the room, and this is what the people who do have those skills did. So even if they don't yet understand why, they get to see what other people who presumably do understand or have some of the skills did.
So that's great advice. So I got in the room, as you put it, because I was curious, because I just talked to people in the office and I wanted to learn. So I asked them questions, and that curiosity led to them thinking quite likely that I was interested, so they get me involved in these things. What was it for you? How did you get in the room? What advice would you give to others that want to get in the room?
Talk to people you don't have to talk to. There's plenty of people in our jobs that we do have to deal with just to do our job at all. Find the people you don't have to deal with, who you might never otherwise run into, except in getting your coffees or at the water cooler or all of these things. So I made a point anywhere I worked. I was given this advice early on of always talking to the finance people, the finance and admin people, the people who actually processed your expenses and paid your payroll. And I was told always butter them up, keep them on side. And certainly that's a good thing to do. I mean, if nothing else, they're usually underpaid and underappreciated. And, whenever I was on my extensive business travels, I'd always say, can I bring you something back from this city and country? And they liked that. But I expanded that, talk to the finance people, talk to the sales people whom I might not have much to do with except when I was literally on a sales call with them. But better still, talk to management, talk to the education delivery people, talk to the support desk, right? There was a large Sybase support desk operation based in Sydney, and I talked to the support engineers and the product support engineers there. The further away from my own business function, the more insight I got into what was going on behind the scenes, and the more I started learning about the why. Right? So many things that puzzled me about why do we do things this way. Like when you're young and full of enthusiasm and have convinced you've got the answer to everything, right? It's really easy to rush in and say, why are you doing it this way? It's obviously dumb. Do it this way instead. And it's almost always a mistake, right? Like the advice I give to anyone I'm mentoring is for at least the first month and maybe even the first 3 months in your job, don't try to improve anything yet, because it's excellent chance that they're doing things for reasons that you have not yet found out. And it might turn out that those are bad reasons or they've made bad decisions, but there might be constraints or other issues that you don't know about. So, anyway, talk to people.
Ask that why with curiosity rather than try and fix it, to try and understand it.
I recently read someone saying when you're going into conversations that might be difficult or might be heated, actually begin with the premise that you're probably wrong, that they
Good
know
advice.
something you don't know, and that without that, anything you're saying is probably wrong. This is not something I'm very good at yet. I'm still learning this and putting it into practice, but I have noticed things are remarkably different if you do that, because all of a sudden it's not about you're wrong and I need to prove to you and get you to agree with me. It's I'm here to learn. I'm here, exactly as you say, to be curious. I'm here to find things out. And the relaxed eye sees better, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice. I have written very much that advice in a LinkedIn post a couple of times. Although, as you say, it's easy to write the advice and to give it. I still fail at doing it myself. It's one of those things that can be a challenge. One of the things I was going to mention, it seems like we had a lot of very similar advice early in our careers, because I too was advised go and talk to finance people, get to know them, go and talk to the tech support and the IT people and get to know them. In a similar vein, I once had a very upset boss who was very frustrated that my computer and my internet access, back in the days when you had to beg for internet access, was granted within a couple of hours of my request, when his request had been sat open for a month. Then I walked past his desk on the way to get coffee a little bit later, and he was on the phone shouting at IT, where I'd walked down to IT and taken him a Mars bar. Didn't cost much, 20p Mars bar, and that was the difference. I'd just been around, asked how their day was, dropped off a Mars bar. I could call it bribery, but I think I'm not going to get in trouble for a 20 pence Mars bar. But as you say, just getting to know people and talking to the people when you didn't have to. Cool. So that's a lot of different things you've done. Always a bridesmaid. So what made you, with that background of always being a bridesmaid, you put it, take this pivot into, should we say, more of a portfolio career and becoming a non-exec?
Kind of happened by accident, really, and it was still in my Sybase days. There was a Sybase user group running in Australia, and they weren't doing very much in Melbourne. They were run out of Sydney. They had people in Sydney. There wasn't anything much happening in Melbourne. And my attitude in work then and now is, if I think something's a really good idea and no one persuades me otherwise, I'll try to find a way to make it happen one way. So I started talking to my own management saying, so why don't we have more involvement with our user group here? We should be providing a venue, we should be funding it, we should be providing speakers, we should be speaking to all of our big clients and asking if they'd like to come and present a case study. If we've got any out-of-town experts here, maybe to deliver a course internally, can we have them speak to the users as well? Because by definition, the people who show up to any user group are the ambassadors and champions and the influencers. They are the people who are the most keen about it. And if they're happy with you and they love you, they will be championing you internally. They'll never be the person making a sales decision, but they will have the ear of the people who do. So my people said, oh, whatever. They didn't really give me very satisfactory answers. And so I said, fine, I'll just do it. I'll just do it in my spare time. And spoke to a few of the more enthusiastic users locally and started running events. And it was, not a very professionally run thing, but that's okay. There were people getting together and lots of topics and lots of speakers, even if it was me half the time, but, bless them, they showed up anyway. And from there, it was a small matter to get on a sort of unofficial committee of what was going on locally at the city level and then at the country level. And then it turned out there was an international user group for the software, and they got in touch with me and said, "We hear you're doing a lot of this stuff. Would you like to be our regional representative for Asia Pacific?" And I said, "That sounds interesting. What does that mean?" They said, "Do exactly what you're doing." I'm like, "Okay, well, if I'm doing exactly what I'm doing, sure." And that was officially a junior position on the board of that. It wasn't really a voting position. There were sort of some tiers of things, but I did move up from that. We loved our fancy titles. I was a vice president of technology there at one point, which just meant I was the most technical of a bunch of technical people. And what tech person doesn't want a title saying that, right? I was very pleased with that. That was awesome. I served as president of the international group for a while because we had rules in our governance and bylaws about we can't have people in that role for too long and we need to rotate it, just fresh blood and have not just the same old person running it in the same old way. So I did my tour of duty there, and that sort of became more and more serious over time. And it went from just have a monthly meeting locally to start flying around places to let's actually run a conference in the US. And that meant travel for me to an international conference and speaking at international conferences and all sorts of fun things like that. And once you start running a physical event or a conference, I mean, that's real money, right? That's not just, can I have £50 petty cash to buy a few pizzas? In a conference is 50,000, 100,000. That's serious money going on there. So that was a fantastic opportunity for me. So that was sort of going on in one thread. And completely unrelated to that, just in my personal life, I was acquainted through friends and family with people who were running a community art gallery, an art gallery to sort of showcase emerging talents who were having trouble getting into the main art galleries around town. And they said, "Hey, do you want to come along and help us run some meetings?" And I did. And after a few meetings of that, they said, "Look, could you consider taking on a role as treasurer for us?" And I said, "Sure. Why?" And they said, "Well, the simple truth that most of us don't want to say out loud is that the artistic temperament is not very good in that sort of role. And we want someone who is not an artist to be doing the cold, hard money part." And I'm like, "Sure, okay." And again, the money involved was small. It was not very big, and we didn't meet very often, and there wasn't really that much I had to do. I guess I balanced the books. I produced the treasurer's report into the annual reports each year. There wasn't that much work. But again, it was at least a glimpse of what is going on in this level, in the not-for-profit level, in the community sector. And it turns out, if I jump ahead just a little bit here, when I applied for one of my current board roles, which is a paid board role, and that's one of the holy grails, actually getting some money for it, they were most impressed by all of my non-IT work. Like they said, "Sure, we see you've been in the American International Sybase User Group and you're part of the UK Sybase User Group, but you're an IT person and being involved in IT groups, that's not really a stretch for you. But the fact that you were part of a community art gallery, that's really impressive. And the fact that you're on the committee of a communal garden here in London, that's really interesting to us because that seems very far away from your comfort zone and well outside your swim lane. And that tells us that you're not just a one-trick pony."
Cool. So let me pull up that thread first of all. So one of your board roles. So what boards are you sitting on at the moment and what are they involved in?
So I'm still on the paid role. That's for IPSI, or the Association of Independent Professionals and Self-Employed. It's as close as the UK has to a guild or union for freelancers. That's really what's going on. But it's not just freelancers. Anyone even with a side gig or just small trading. I mean, if you were running a stall in a market, this would still be of interest to people. That's my big one. That's the one that takes most of my time. I'm still on the UK Sybase user group, although that's sort of falling a bit by the wayside. We haven't had an in-person conference since the pandemic time. We haven't really recovered since. But we do have masterclasses and online events, so it's still alive. The American one, the International Sybase User Group, or ISUG, that shut down last year. We never really recovered as a result of pandemic. I mean, every membership organization lost members during the pandemic, and then economic downturns and interest rates. Everyone tightened their belts and said, what money do I really need to keep spending? And it's easy to feel that a professional society or organization is not something you absolutely have to keep running when times are tight, which I understand. No hard feelings. I've done similar myself and backed out of a couple of other organisations I was just a member of. And I'm still on the committee of the Communal Garden in London, which in many ways is actually where I'm learning the most for communication and all the people skills, particularly for me as a brash Australian who moved to the UK not all that long ago, learning a lot about the British art of gentle correction, let's say.
So I'm going to pull up the communal garden then, because I think, as you say, the UK Sybase, the US Sybase, you're all dealing with technical people, very much in our wheelhouse, kind of what we use today to day. And perhaps, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, IPSI might be a little bit along that way, because I believe it used to be the Professional Contractors Group, which was filled with a lot of IT contractors back in the day when I was a member. So again, the communal garden is probably very, very different, particularly if something that's technical. What is it that makes that so interesting? Is it that you have a diverse bunch of backgrounds for the communal garden? Is it the very different views? What's the thing that really makes it a challenge and a good learning experience?
Two elements there, I think. The first, exactly as you say, is that it's a very diverse group, because literally all that unites us is that we all live in the same area and that we are effectively neighbours. So if you can imagine working with the people who are also your neighbours, I think instantly you start grasping some of the issues you might see there, because we don't always get along with our co-workers and we don't always get along with our neighbours, and people who are both at once are perhaps some interesting challenges. But diversity is wonderful. I'm a huge fan of diversity, and not just for social justice reasons, but for example, the Harvard Business Review has done a bunch of studies that found the more diverse that boards are of listed public companies, the better the company performance seems to be. Now, I don't know if anyone thinks that this is a direct A to B causation, but certainly there's correlation. Diversity on the board usually means better company performance. And that has interested me from the day I heard that about 10 years ago. I thought, fascinating. And I've got plenty of ideas about why that might be. I think probably the number one there is, if everyone on the board looks like me, thinks like me, comes from the same background as me, then what value am I adding, right? Anything I think of, they're going to think of as well. And if we're all thinking the same thing and making our decisions in the same way, then we have an echo chamber, we have a little bubble of confirmation bias. No one is ever seriously challenging anything, and that's a whole thing we could talk about. Constructive challenge and constructive criticism is a skill. And you mentioned before you found you were getting a lot of transferable skills from working in different domains. And this is absolutely probably the number one thing that I'm bringing back from boards into my work as a senior IT individual contributor, the ability to disagree in constructive ways that don't make enemies. And, maybe I don't get my way. I most often don't get my way, in fact. And then the ability to disagree and commit and just move on and get on with it. You've said your bit. You've tried to do the right thing. You've heard people out. Maybe they knew things I didn't. Often they change my mind. Sometimes they don't change my mind and I still think I'm right. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I'm there, employed and paid money to get stuff done. So get on with it and get stuff done.
And sometimes there isn't a right or wrong answer. Sometimes there's just, we've got 2-3 different choices. I think this choice is the best. You think this choice is the best. We've got to pick one of them. Somebody's not going to get their way. So sometimes we say just have to disagree and commit. Yeah, I've led a lot of the same Harvard Business Review studies and look at the diversity. I think one thing that I always find missing from a lot of the diversity talks that people don't focus on is, and you really hit on it there, is we've got to not think the same. It's really about we want that different views, different experiences, different backgrounds that will lead to that different perspectives. And then, and this is something I think we're very bad at in Britain, actually being able to air those different perspectives constructively, hear the other person, and as we said earlier, approach it with curiosity. It's like, oh, you think my idea is not the right idea. Why is that? What context am I missing? What background and what experience have you had that leads you to believe that what I think is the best idea is the worst idea, or whatever you think. So what we can draw those out and get that different perspectives. I worked with a guy nearly 10 years ago now that was told to fire by one of the board several times because he was always arguing with me. But what was a real shame there is that this board member could never appreciate that he was always arguing with me, and quite dramatically, because he was from the continent of Europe, where, shall we say, they're a bit more expressive. Try not to give away his identity for anyone that's listening that might know him. But it was never rude. It was never aggressive. It was excited and passionate and constructive. And what I loved about working with this chap is that we disagreed vehemently many times. We argued about it, but it was always constructive. And at the end of the day, I'd say about half the time we went with my idea, half the time with his, but we always ended up with the best idea because we challenged them. We had that brutal, honest, but respectful disagreement, and the ideas were challenged, and that generally led to the best idea being adopted, or at least the best that we knew at the time. And that was so valuable, and it got the business through a lot of challenges that it wouldn't survive otherwise. So yeah, I think that's those great experiences, and I wish more software engineers get involved in a communal garden perhaps, or do something with their neighbours and find out how to do that, disagree and commit. And I also think more boards need it. As I said, this the board of this company was your typical 60-year-old white male, so perhaps they were lacking the diversity themselves. But again, if they'd had a bit more of that different perspective and different way of looking at it, they would have seen this constructive debate as very, very powerful and useful. Would have seen the benefit it was bringing the business. We'd have created more of that psychological safety that allows for people to actually disagree and commit. So last thing on my hobby horse is I far too often see people misunderstand disagree and commit, where it's, you disagree and then you commit to my idea. That's not the point, is it? And I'm sure Joe, it's for people listening, it's about everybody shares their views. We reach what we can agree on, should we say the majority, or have we reached an agreement, and then we all commit to trying to make it work. And if it doesn't work, we don't then place blame. We say that we as a group agreed to commit to this idea, despite any disagreements, and now we've learned it didn't work, or it did work. We move forward and do the next best thing. Sorry. Absolutely. That's my hobby horse about disagree and commit, because it's too often misunderstood.
Right. I mean, so many sort of wise ideas that sound like they've come out of almost, I might say, a therapy or coaching background tend to get weaponized and misused, I think. And this is far from the only one. But I agree. Disagree and commit means you don't know in advance what that position that you're committing to is. It doesn't mean I'm holding the line and this is secretly what I'm committing to in my heart. It means I'm genuinely going in with an open mind. I don't know the answer yet. And on one of my boards, I was a minority of one arguing for a particular view. I had four others, all wanting to do one thing, and I was arguing for another thing. And I said, okay, look, I don't want to cost us too much time on this. Can I have 3 minutes to put my best pitch to you for why I think this is the right way? And they were all good enough to hear me out with an open mind, and they discussed it and they thought about it and still disagreed with me. And I said, okay, well, you're all very smart people, and I don't think I'm smarter than all four of you put together. So if all four of you think this, there must be something I'm not seeing that is more obvious to you than it is to me. So no, I'm not going to say I'm smarter than the rest of the room put together. Even I'm not that arrogant and don't have that much ego. So sure, okay, I'm happy to go with this. Thank you for hearing me out. And I had at least three of them take me aside in the break or in an email afterwards saying, thank you for doing that. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. Right? And I've heard at Amazon, the top executives have a saying. They say, strong opinions lightly held. They don't want their top executives to be diffident about anything. They expect everyone to have identified what they think is the right thing to do and argue for it, argue passionately for it, but be prepared to discard that for any reason, right? Maybe there's better evidence. Maybe it's as simple as someone saying, that sounds good, but sorry, the answer's got to be no. Right? You might
Yeah.
never actually be given a satisfactory response. You are still expected to just get on with what I like to call moving the story forward, right?
Yeah, and that strong opinions weakly held is something that I've lived by for a good 15, maybe more years. But again, it's been weaponized. I have been in one company where it was viewed as a weakness that I changed my mind. I vehemently argued for one thing, and then 2 days later, a couple of engineers confronted me, made a case. I wasn't thoroughly convinced, so they got a bit more data, and we agreed that I'd review it. And I sat there and went, okay, yeah, I agree. Next meeting I had with the other part of the executive, I was like, no, I've changed my mind, we're going for this. And it was viewed as a weakness rather than. So again, it can be weaponized a little bit in the long area. So it's a difficult one, but I wish more people would follow it. And I think that there is plenty of evidence from Amazon and other companies that it works very well if we give it that chance. And I think it's a great thing to have from leaders. You build a lot of loyalty from the people who are working for you if they know that they can disagree strongly with you, come forward and put forward data, and you will listen to it. And as you say, there were times when I had to go back to them on some other things and say, no, I can't get into the details of why, but no, you can't do what you're asking, because there were things that I knew as an executive that meant that we couldn't do that, and I couldn't share them for legal reasons. But because I'd listened and made that safe space from the rest of the time and been willing to adapt my mind, they were then happier to take that, or at least moaned at me less, that they were happy to understand that there must be a good reason for it. There must be it's not just that I was on a power trip or trying to assert some authority. There was a reason, and I couldn't explain it to them. So, yeah, I'm a strong believer in strong opinions weakly held.
Well, that's what we all want, isn't it? In our personal relationships, our work relationships, we want to be heard and to feel that we've been given a chance to be heard, and we want to feel that we've been understood. And as a manager, it's not that hard most of the time to help our people feel that they have been heard and understood. And that means exactly as we've now both said, we can't always nonetheless say yes or give them what they want, but we can at least help them be heard and feel understood. And that goes such a long way. When my management have done that to me, they have earned my loyalty so well with that.
Exactly.
Even if they didn't give me a single thing I wanted, if at least I felt that they understood and were swayed by it and gave me the impression, and for all I know, they were brilliant actors and just fooling me into thinking this, but I certainly had the impression that they genuinely agreed that what I said, as far as it went, was a good argument for doing what I wanted, but there were other things I wasn't privy to that were a reason we couldn't. And that's all they had to do. I never said, you've got to tell me why. I just said, if you can't for other reasons, can you at least tell me that you can't for other reasons? And when they said, yeah, that's exactly the situation, I'm like, okay, well, I'll pick my battles. This isn't one I can win. That's fine.
And the other great thing that you can do there as a manager, or that you as an IC can receive from a manager, is for them to view it as a coachable moment, for them to also say, yes, you want us to do this. Maybe you want to say pay down more technical debt, for example, but you can't just shout about WTS per minute and go and say that psychometric complexity. When you're presenting that to an executive of the board, you need to talk about these different things. This is the way you need to phrase it. Psychometric complexity, take my example. Maybe the executives on the board aren't going to understand that. So how can we translate it into the language that they will understand? What problem is it causing the business? What pain is it introducing that they care about? Maybe go and talk to them a little bit. And again, back to what we said right at the beginning. I used to ask people when I was getting coffee, what challenges is the business facing? What's your biggest concern at the moment? That made it really simple then to go back and tie into some things that I wanted. It's like, hey, I think we should look into this agile. You were talking about this problem here where we delivered a project to the customer a year after they've still the requirements don't match. Have you heard of agile? Should we explore this as a way of addressing it? You know? And again, many times they didn't listen, it wasn't right, it was probably, but at least then it meant you could tie your request to something they cared about and speak their language, as I've put it many times. So great coachable moment for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've just touched on there is a good specific example of a more general idea in business. I'm sure you've heard of this. It's the jobs to be done theory. I love jobs to be done. It's one of those ideas that once you have this installed in your head, you can never not see it.
So for anyone that's listening that isn't familiar with it, would you like to explain it, Joe?
Yeah, look, the classic jobs to be done example is people who are buying a quarter-inch drill bit. They don't care about the drill bit. They don't want a quarter-inch drill bit. What they want is a quarter-inch hole in something. And that's the real job to be done. And so if you are selling and marketing your drill bits for anything other than here's a really easy way to get that hole somewhere that you want, you've sort of missed the point. This is also what people are talking about when they're saying, what is the question behind the question in job interviews, right? If an interviewer asks me, tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult colleague, they don't actually care about a time I dealt with a difficult colleague. What they're really saying, I think, is probably something like, I need to know how you approach conflict.
Yeah. On that jobs to be done one, that example of a drill bit, it's a classic one I've used many times, and I think I came across it actually in a sales book when I started my first business in 2001. I thought, hey, I'm a software engineer. I hate sales, don't want to do sales, but the company is me. I'm going to have to be the salesperson. How do I do sales? And one of the first examples I came across was understanding what people are trying to do. The example being that when you look up at a hardware store and say, I want to buy a drill bit, you don't really want to buy a drill bit. What you want to do is you want to achieve some job. My classic example being you want to put up some shelves. To put up the shelves, you need a hole in the wall. So if you're a bad salesman, you go, what size drill bit do you want? You want X. You give them X. They go away and they buy a drill bit for, let's call it £3. If you're a good salesman, you go, oh yeah, you want a drill bit? What are you trying to do? I'm trying to put up some shelves. Awesome. So you'll need a drill bit. Do you have any roll plugs? Do you have the right screws? Have you got the right drill? Okay. What about the shelves? Do you have everything you need? And you could potentially sell them a lot more stuff. So good for the business. You generate a bigger amount of revenue and hopefully a bigger profit from that. But also, you've built trust with the customer. So yes, they spent more money, but you have solved their problem. They don't go home, drill the hole, and then go, oh hell, now I need some wall plugs. So they don't have to make multiple trips. You've helped them solve that problem, and you've become a trusted advisor then. So it's a win-win for both sides. Again, we're like all the way back to where we started in understanding the problem and asking about the why and how useful it is, whether it's from sales or whether it's from building the solution. And being that trusted advisor as a consultant or as a software engineer.
I love that you put this in terms of trust. I think that's exactly what's going on. And same with the job interviews, the question behind the question, right? I mean, the entire job interview process exists because no one on this planet knows how to hire. We don't know how to hire in ways that are safe and reliable. Doesn't matter what our methods are and our techniques. And if I'm in big tech having day-long loops and 7 rounds of interview, I still can't guarantee I'm going to get a good hire who does a good job and is reasonable to work with, right? Because I think the days of the toxic rock star are probably over in most places. They're no longer regarded as a good hire. That's probably someone you want to prevent hiring in most cases. And I say that as someone who has been that toxic rock star in my youth and in fact lost jobs on that basis. That some of my most successful job interviews were where I said something really disarming and really just so obviously authentic, like it could not possibly have been rehearsed or planned or practiced. Someone asked me once, quite a long time ago, you'll be dealing with a lot of end users who are fairly unsophisticated in their IT understanding. How well do you tolerate fools? Like, what an interesting question to be asked. And my answer, I don't know, the gods were smiling on me because my answer, quick as a flash, was, I can fake it. And the people in the room again leant forward, started smiling. They were warm and they were animated because I'd shown them something real about me. Like those words just spoke a whole story. I think I was saying, yeah, I understand the requirements. I have enough self-knowledge to know that I will be frustrated and I will be irritated. I also understand what professionalism requires of me. I have enough emotional self-regulation to be able to stay professional, even in trying circumstances where anyone would get frustrated. And I've done it enough that I've got it down to a simple habit and it's no longer a massive effort. And I was hired. I don't know I was hired purely because of my answer to that question, but I'm sure it played a big factor.
Sure, it helps. Yeah, it's interesting. I think in the early part of my career, I would probably have said I don't. Nowadays, again, it's that curiosity. I try and approach it from a, let's be curious. I want to try and understand this person. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe they're not a fool. Maybe I could be wrong. That's the end of part 1 of my podcast with Joe Woodhouse. In part 2, we'll talk about his journey from IC to non-executive director. We'll talk about the skills and competencies that you need to build and how you can do them to make that transition, just like Joe did.